Welcome. This is Danny Haiphong, and you are tuning in to a reading of one of my published articles, this time in China Global Television Network. And this is part of an ongoing series where I'll be sharing my articles in video and audio format here on the Left Lens, and especially to my subscribers at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. These are all available to the public, but subscriptions are encouraged. So this article is entitled Biden's Global COVID-19 Summit is an Exercise in American Selfishness. And this article was originally published on September 22nd, 2021. So on September 22nd, Joe Biden held a virtual summit on COVID-19 and pledged to increase U.S. assistance in the fight to end the pandemic. Biden's promises, when taken out of context, appear reasonable. The U.S. will pledge an additional $370 million to administer COVID-19 vaccines globally and work with the European Union and the World Health Organization on the goal of ensuring 70% of the world's population is fully vaccinated by 2022, the end of 2022. The U.S. will also increase its donations of ventilators, therapeutics, and personal protective equipment, or PPE, to lower income countries. Unfortunately, the summit was indicative of the selfishness that the United States has demonstrated throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Rather than speak to world leaders as an equal, President Joe Biden positioned the United States as the primary force capable of ending the pandemic. No humility was expressed in the face of the U.S.'s disastrous response to the pandemic up until this point. The United States leads the world in both COVID-19 deaths and COVID-19 cases. Furthermore, history has proven that promises made by U.S. leaders are rarely kept. The U.S.'s policy on COVID-19 distribution is a key example. In May, the Biden administration signaled that it would waive vaccine patent restrictions to make Pfizer and Moderna vaccines more accessible for the world. This move was largely symbolic, however, as it has taken months for the U.S. to increase its donations to the World Health Organization. Vaccine apartheid has been the result. Poorer, non-white countries have an average vaccination rate of less than 10% of the population, while the U.S. and its Western partners have stockpiled vaccines to the point where millions of doses are nearing their expiration dates. The summit was thus an attempt by the United States to communicate strength when humility is what is needed most. Biden stated that the virtual forum was a clear sign that, quote-unquote, democracies can deliver on promises to improve the global situation. He firmly asserted, however, that the U.S. was most interested in its own citizens first and the global population second. Such an approach continues the U.S.'s long-standing trend of politicizing COVID-19 at the expense of real cooperation. The truth is that the democracies that Biden speaks of lack a historical record of fighting the pandemic in the interest of the majority of humanity. The inadequacies of Western-style governance have been on full display since the beginning of the pandemic. Democracy has been championed in the US, the UK, and the EU with regard to individual property rights and, quote-unquote, the freedom to choose. But for millions who enjoy Biden's version of democracy, this has meant that they have the freedom to contract COVID-19 and perish with little assistance from society. A general lack of trust has been sown across the Western world as governments have abdicated their responsibility to protect human life. The United States and its European allies possess all of the resources required to lead the fight against COVID-19, but none of the will. Biden did not mention China once during the summit and has done little to mend relations so that robust cooperation between the two countries can occur. Yet China has demonstrated the most consistent commitment to defeating the pandemic out of every major economy. More than 1 billion Chinese citizens are fully vaccinated, and the central government has delivered nearly the same number of doses to the international community. Furthermore, China possesses the most effective public health response to the crisis, as evidenced by its low death in case rates. By contrast, there is no reason to trust the U.S. in fulfilling the modest commitments outlined at the virtual summit. Public health advocates say that the U.S. pledge will not come to fruition fast enough to ensure that the spread of COVID-19 is curbed around the world. Furthermore, the U.S. has not yet pledged to make the COVID-19 vaccine a public good. This means that the U.S. and other countries seeking access to Pfizer or Moderna vaccines must negotiate with private manufacturers at costs that are entirely out of reach for lower-income countries. China, on the other hand, has long committed to doing the opposite. The U.S.'s ongoing failure to learn and cooperate with China in the fight against the pandemic has been a mistake of historic proportions. Biden's global COVID-19 summit was an exercise in American selfishness, which offers no indication that the U.S. will reverse its dangerous course. The U.S. continues to place hegemony over the priorities of humanity. While Biden speaks of increasing cooperation, his administration remains committed to a quote-unquote America First attitude. This attitude translates into policies of endless war, economic inequality, and social duress, rather than the concrete actions needed to truly bring an end to a crisis like COVID-19. You have been listening to a reading of one of my published articles, this time in CGTN, later in September 22nd, on Biden's global COVID-19 summit and how it was an exercise in American selfishness. If you support this work, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel, The Left Lens. Please do give a like. Please also subscribe to my Patreon at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong and catch all of our work weekly at blackagendareport.com.